I walked into my parents' kitchen expecting the usual Sunday dinner conversation about work and weather. Instead, I found my mother frantically clicking browser windows shut on my old laptop while my father stood behind her like a guilty accomplice. The moment they saw me, Dad immediately launched into an explanation about how my younger brother Jake desperately needed $55,000 to save his failing restaurant. Mom chimed in that I should help family in crisis. What they had just been doing hit me like a freight train. They were attempting to access my bank accounts without my knowledge or permission, treating my financial security as their personal emergency fund for my irresponsible brother's latest disaster. The silence in that kitchen stretched longer than any family argument we had ever experienced. My hands trembled slightly as I reached for the laptop, but Mom pulled it closer to her chest like she was protecting something precious, rather than hiding evidence of betrayal. "Grady, before you get upset, let me explain." Dad said, his insurance salesman voice kicking into damage control mode. His weathered face showed the strain of whatever scheme they had been cooking up behind my back. "Explain what exactly?" I asked, my voice carrying an edge I rarely used with my parents. "Explain why you were trying to break into my banking information." Mom's defensive posture told me everything. Sarah had always been the family peacekeeper, the retired teacher who could smooth over any conflict with her gentle reasoning. But right now, she looked cornered and desperate. "We weren't breaking in," she insisted, her gray hair slightly disheveled from the stress. "We were just checking to see if you had enough money to spare. Jake is in real trouble this time." The phrase, "this time," hung in the air like smoke. How many previous times had there been? How many family emergencies had I missed while building my career as a financial advisor? Dad sat down heavily in his usual chair at the kitchen table, the one with the slightly wobbly leg that he never bothered fixing. Mark was 61 years old, had worked in insurance his entire adult life, and should have understood the legal implications of what they were attempting. "Son, we already told Jake you would help him out," he admitted, avoiding eye contact. "Hometown Grill is about to go under, and he owes serious money to some very impatient people." The kitchen door swung open with dramatic timing, and Jake himself walked in like he had been listening from the hallway. At 28, my younger brother still carried himself with the cocky confidence that had gotten him into trouble throughout his life. His dark hair was perfectly styled despite the supposed financial crisis, and his clothes looked expensive for someone claiming bankruptcy. "Grady, thank God you're here," Jake said immediately, switching into his well-practiced victim mode. "I know this looks bad, but I'm absolutely desperate. Amanda is crying every night, and we're about to lose everything." "Everything you built with other people's money," I replied, crossing my arms. "How exactly did you rack up $55,000 in debt from a small-town restaurant?" Jake's confident mask slipped for just a moment. "It's complicated. The food costs went up. Customer traffic dropped after that bad review in the county paper, and then there were some unexpected equipment repairs." Mom jumped back into the conversation, her teacher instincts trying to mediate between her two sons. "Grady, you make good money at that investment firm. You live alone in that nice apartment. You don't have children to support. Jake has a family depending on him. A family he created before securing his financial foundation." I pointed out immediately, regretting how cold that sounded. Dad pulled out a manila folder that had been sitting on the counter, apparently prepared for this confrontation. "We've done our research, son. We know approximately what you earn, and we know you've been saving money for years. This isn't charity we're asking for, it's family obligation." The folder contained printouts of salary surveys for financial advisors in our area, estimates of my living expenses, and what appeared to be calculations about how much I could afford to give Jake. They had been planning this intervention for weeks, maybe months. "You researched my income?" I asked, feeling violated in a way I had never experienced with family. Jake moved closer, his desperation becoming more apparent. "Look, I know this seems like a lot to ask, but I've already told my creditors that my successful brother would guarantee the debt. Some of these people aren't the patient type, if you know what I mean." The room seemed to shrink around me. You told them what? Just that you would back me up if things got tight, Jake said quickly. I had to give them something to buy more time. Mom reached across the table and grabbed my hand. Her skin felt cold and clammy. Grady, we co-signed loans for Jake worth $28,000 already. If the restaurant fails completely, we lose our retirement fund. The full scope of the family's financial entanglement was becoming clear. They had not just spent their own money on Jake's business venture. They had mortgaged their future on his success, and now they wanted to mortgage mine as well. Dad's voice dropped to almost a whisper. We may have already committed your credit to some preliminary paperwork. The words hit me like ice water. What kind of preliminary paperwork? Nothing final, Mom said quickly. Just some guarantee documents that Jake needed to show his suppliers. We figured you would understand once you saw how serious the situation had become. Jake's phone buzzed and he glanced at it with obvious anxiety. Amanda's texting again. The bank called about the house payment and she's having panic attacks. She's 6 months pregnant, Grady. This stress can't be good for the baby. I looked around the kitchen where I'd eaten thousands of family meals where homework had been completed and birthday celebrations held. The familiar yellow walls and country-style decorations now felt like the backdrop for an ambush rather than a family discussion. So, let me understand this correctly, I said slowly. You attempted to access my bank accounts without permission. You promised creditors I would cover Jake's debts without asking me. You researched my income like I'm some kind of investment opportunity, and you've already signed documents using my credit worthiness as collateral. The silence confirmed everything. And if I refused to go along with this plan that was developed entirely without my knowledge or consent, I'm the selfish family member who doesn't care about his pregnant sister-in-law or his struggling brother. Jake's phone buzzed again. This time he answered it, and I could hear a man's voice on the other end speaking loudly enough that we all caught fragments of the conversation. Words like payment, deadline, and consequences drifted across the kitchen. When Jake hung up, his face had gone pale. That was Vincent Torres from the food supply company. He says he's going to start calling you directly since you're supposedly guaranteeing the account. Monday morning arrived with the jarring sound of my phone ringing at 6:30. The caller ID showed my bank's customer service number, which never called unless something was seriously wrong. Mr. Grady Patterson. The voice belonged to Robert Coleman, my bank manager for the past 5 years. I need to discuss some unusual activity on your accounts immediately. Can you come in this morning? An hour later, I sat across from Robert's desk while he spread documents in front of me like evidence at a trial. His 20 years of banking experience had apparently never prepared him for a situation quite like mine. Someone has been making inquiries about your credit capacity and liquid assets. Robert explained his professional demeanor, barely concealing his concern. We've also received preliminary guarantee documents with your signature that don't match our records. My stomach dropped as he showed me photocopies of papers bearing my name in Jake's familiar handwriting. The signature was close enough to pass casual inspection, but clearly forged when examined closely. The concerning part, Robert continued, is that these inquiries and pending liabilities have already affected your credit score. It's dropped 43 points in the past 2 weeks. Before I could fully process this information, my phone rang. The caller ID showed Brady Law Office, and I remembered that Thomas Brady had been our family's attorney for decades. Grady, I need to speak with you about a consultation your parents requested, Thomas said without preamble. His voice carried the weight of uncomfortable knowledge. They asked me about the legal methods for accessing an adult child's inheritance or savings in emergency situations. What did you tell them? I asked, feeling like my entire support network was crumbling. I told them there are no legal methods without your explicit consent, Thomas replied. But they seemed convinced that family emergency provisions might apply. I think you need to know they're considering more drastic measures. After hanging up with Thomas, I tried to focus on my work at the investment firm, but concentration proved impossible. My assistant knocked on my door around 10:30. Mr. Patterson, there's a man here to see you who says it's urgent family business, she said nervously. He seems quite agitated. Jake stood in my office doorway looking haggard and desperate. His usually perfect hair was uncombed, and his clothes looked like he had slept in them. Grady, we need to talk privately, he said, glancing around at my colleagues who were starting to stare. I closed my office door and gestured for him to sit down, but he remained standing and began pacing like a caged animal. Vincent Torres came to the restaurant this morning with 2 other men, Jake said, his voice shaking. They want their money and they want it now. I told them my brother was handling the situation, so they're planning to contact you directly. You had no right to involve me in your business dealings, I said firmly. Jake spun around, his desperation transforming into anger. My business dealings? This is family, Grady. You've been successful while I've been struggling, and now when I need help, you want to lecture me about rights. My desk phone rang, interrupting the argument. The caller ID showed an unfamiliar number. Mr. Patterson, this is Vincent Torres from Torres Food Supply. I understand you're guaranteeing payment for Hometown Grill's outstanding balance of $17,400. We need to discuss immediate settlement. Jake's eyes went wide as he realized his creditor was actually following through on contacting me. Mr. Torres, I haven't guaranteed any payments for anyone, I said clearly. There's been some kind of misunderstanding. No misunderstanding on my end, Vincent replied, his tone hardening. Your brother has been using your name and reputation to secure credit for months. If you're backing out now, we have a serious problem. After hanging up, I stared at Jake with growing realization of how deep this deception ran. How many creditors think I'm responsible for your debts? I demanded. Jake slumped into the chair, finally sitting down. Look, I may have mentioned that my successful brother would help out if things got too tight. These people needed some kind of assurance before they would extend credit. That's not mentioning Jake, that's fraud. My office phone rang again. This time the caller identified himself as representing a private lending company that had provided Jake with bridge financing for restaurant equipment. The amount owed was $12,800, and they had also been told I would guarantee payment. As I hung up from that call, my assistant buzzed the intercom. Mr. Patterson, your girlfriend is here. She says it's important. Laura walked into my office and immediately sensed the tension. Her nursing background had given her excellent instincts for reading stressful situations. What's going on? She asked, looking between Jake and me. Family financial crisis, I said, trying to keep the explanation simple. Laura's expression changed in a way I had never seen before. What kind of financial crisis involves your work office? Jake stood up abruptly. I should go. Grady, please think about what I said. Amanda's really struggling with the stress, and the doctor is worried about the pregnancy. After Jake left, Laura sat down in the chair he had vacated. Her calm demeanor was reassuring after the morning's chaos. I need to tell you something, she said quietly. My family went through something similar when I was in college. My uncle convinced my parents to guarantee his business loans, and it nearly destroyed their credit and retirement savings. How did it end? I asked, though I was afraid to hear the answer. Badly, Laura said, but it taught us all about the difference between helping family and enabling destructive behavior. What's happening to you right now isn't normal family support. It's financial manipulation. My computer chimed with an email notification. The message was from Jake, sent to my work address with the subject line, Payment Schedule Proposal. He had created a detailed plan for how I could cover his various debts over the next 18 months, complete with interest calculations and payment dates. He's already planning how to spend money I haven't agreed to give him, I said, showing Laura the email. She read it over my shoulder, and I could feel her tense up. Grady, this isn't just about money anymore. This is about whether you're going to let your family destroy your financial future and professional reputation. Before I could respond, my desk phone rang again. This time the caller was someone claiming to be from a collection agency, asking about Jake's unpaid utility bills that allegedly had my name attached as a secondary contact. As I hung up from that call, the full scope of Jake's deception was becoming clear. He had not just told a few creditors that I might help him. He had systematically used my name and reputation to secure credit and defer payments across multiple businesses and services. Laura reached across the desk and took my hand. "You need legal help, and you need it immediately." Tuesday evening brought an unexpected and unwelcome visit to my apartment. I was reviewing financial reports when loud knocking interrupted my concentration. Through the peephole, I could see Jake standing with a man I didn't recognize, and both of them looked agitated. "Grady, open up," Jake called through the door. "Frank is here about the restaurant supply account, and we need to clear this up right now." I opened the door reluctantly, and Jake immediately pushed past me with his companion following close behind. Frank Romano was a thick-set man in his late 40s whose presence filled my living room with an uncomfortable energy. "You must be the brother," Frank said, extending a hand that felt like shaking concrete. "Jake here has been telling everyone that you're backing his debts. Time to make good on those promises." "I never made any promises," I said firmly, not accepting the handshake. "Jake used my name without permission." Frank's demeanor shifted immediately. "So you're saying your brother's been lying about having family support? That makes this situation much more serious." Jake jumped in quickly, his voice rising with panic. No, Frank. Grady just needs time to understand the situation. He's very financially conservative, but he won't let family lose everything." "Conservative is one thing," Frank replied, his eyes never leaving my face. "Lying about guarantees is something else entirely." My phone rang, providing a brief interruption. The caller ID showed my friend David Park, who worked as an accountant for a firm across town. "Grady, I've been doing some research like you asked," David said. "The financial damage from identity theft can be much worse than you realize. You need to act fast to protect yourself." Frank was clearly listening to every word of the phone conversation, and his expression grew more threatening. "Identity theft," Frank repeated when I hung up. "Now you're calling your own brother a thief." "I'm calling it what it is," I said, trying to maintain calm despite feeling cornered in my own home. Jake's face flushed red with embarrassment and anger. "Grady, you're making this worse than it needs to be. Just tell Frank you'll work out a payment plan." "I will do no such thing." Frank pulled out his phone and made a call while standing in my living room. "Yeah, it's me. The brother is refusing to honor the guarantees. We may need to escalate this situation." After Frank hung up, he looked between Jake and me with obvious disappointment. "I was hoping to resolve this quietly, but you're forcing my hand. Jake, you've got 72 hours to produce payment or find someone who will. I've got my own people to answer to." Once they left, I immediately called David back. His accounting expertise had helped several friends navigate financial crises, and I desperately needed objective advice. "Based on what you've described, Jake has been committing identity fraud for months," David said without hesitation. "You need to document everything and consider filing a police report." "Against my own brother. Against someone who's destroying your credit and potentially exposing you to criminal liability," David corrected. "Family relationships don't supersede federal laws about identity theft." Wednesday morning brought more disturbing news. My mail included several official-looking notices from creditors I had never heard of, all demanding payment for services allegedly provided to Jake with me listed as a guarantor. One letter particularly caught my attention. It was from the county courthouse informing me that my name had been listed as a reference for Jake's mortgage modification application. The implication was that I had vouched for his ability to pay, even though I had never spoken to anyone about Jake's mortgage. I was still reading through the correspondence when my apartment intercom buzzed. The doorman announced that my parents were downstairs asking to come up. When Mom and Dad arrived at my door, they looked exhausted and defeated. The confident manipulation from Sunday dinner had been replaced by obvious desperation. "Grady, we need to talk," Mom said, her teacher voice now pleading rather than instructive. "Things have gotten much more complicated." Dad sat heavily on my couch, suddenly looking every one of his 61 years. "Son, we may have made some serious mistakes trying to help Jake." "What kind of mistakes?" I asked, though I was beginning to fear the answer. Mom pulled out a stack of papers from her purse. "We signed documents saying we would guarantee Jake's debts using our house as collateral, but we also listed you as a backup guarantor without really understanding what that meant." The papers she handed me were legally binding agreements that put my parents' retirement home at risk, while simultaneously claiming that I had agreed to secondary liability for debts I knew nothing about. "You put your house up as collateral for Jake's business?" I asked, incredulous. "We thought the restaurant would turn around quickly," Dad said defensively. "Jake showed us projected earnings that looked very promising." "Projected by whom?" "By Jake," Mom admitted quietly. My phone rang, interrupting the family crisis management session. The caller ID showed my workplace number. "Grady, this is Catherine Hughes," my boss said without preamble. "I need you in my office immediately. We've received some concerning inquiries about your personal finances that could affect your professional licensing." After hanging up, I looked at my parents with a mixture of anger and sadness. Jake's financial problems are now threatening my career. Dad stood up and began pacing a habit he'd developed during stressful insurance negotiations. "Maybe we can all go talk to Jake together and figure out a family solution." The family solution was for everyone to respect boundaries and not forge my signature or use my name without permission, I replied. Mom started crying, something I had rarely seen in my adult life. "We just wanted to help him succeed. You've always been so responsible and successful, and Jake has struggled with everything he's tried. So you decided to sacrifice my financial security to enable his irresponsibility? We thought you would understand once you saw how desperate the situation had become," Dad said. "I understand that you chose Jake's immediate wants over my long-term financial stability without even consulting me." My apartment intercom buzzed again. This time the doorman announced that a woman named Amanda was downstairs asking to speak with me urgently. Jake's wife arrived at my door looking 6 months pregnant and absolutely exhausted. Amanda had always been sweet and soft-spoken, but she carried herself with new determination that I had never seen before. "Grady, I need to tell you some things about Jake that he doesn't want you to know," she said, settling carefully into my armchair. "What kind of things?" "The gambling," Amanda said quietly. "He's been gambling online and at the casino near the state line. That's where most of the money really went, not into restaurant expenses." Mom gasped audibly. "Gambling?" Jake told us the money went to suppliers and equipment repairs. Amanda shook her head sadly. "Some of it went to the restaurant, but Jake's been hiding his gambling addiction for over a year. I found credit card statements and withdrawal records that don't match anything he's told the family." Dad sank back into the couch, looking completely defeated. "How much gambling?" "I think around $30,000, maybe more," Amanda said. "He's been lying to everyone, including me, about where the money really goes." The room fell silent as everyone absorbed this information. The family crisis was no longer about supporting a struggling small business. It was about enabling a gambling addiction that had been hidden behind entrepreneurial storytelling. Amanda wiped away tears that had started flowing. "I'm not asking you to give him money, Grady. I'm asking you to help me figure out how to protect my children from this disaster." Before anyone could respond, my phone rang. The caller ID showed the local newspaper's number. "Mr. Patterson, this is Jennifer Stone from the County Herald. I understand there's an interesting story about family financial responsibility involving a local restaurant. Would you care to comment?" My heart sank as I realized Jake had escalated the situation beyond family manipulation. He was now using public pressure and media attention to try to force my cooperation. "No comment," I said, hanging up quickly. Mom looked confused. "Why would the newspaper be calling you?" "Because Jake has apparently decided to take this fight public," I said, feeling the walls closing in around me. Dad's phone buzzed with a text message. After reading it, his face went white. "Jake wants to meet with all of us tonight at the restaurant. He says he has a solution that will satisfy everyone. Amanda shook her head vigorously. Don't trust any solution Jake proposes without legal advice. He's been manipulating situations for months to get what he wants. As my family members prepared to leave my apartment, I realized that the crisis had moved far beyond financial manipulation. Jake was now playing a public relations game where my professional reputation was the stake, and he was willing to destroy it to save himself from the consequences of his own choices. The phone rang one more time before everyone left. This time, the caller ID showed Jake's number. Grady, I hope you're ready to do the right thing for this family. Jake said, his voice carrying a new edge that I had never heard before. Because tomorrow morning the whole town is going to know what kind of brother you really are. Thursday morning's local news included a story that made my blood run cold. The headline read, "Successful Son Refuses to Save Family Restaurant." And Jake's face filled the television screen with an expression of wounded nobility that he had perfected for maximum sympathy. My brother Grady has done very well for himself in the financial industry, Jake told reporter Jennifer Stone, his voice carefully modulated for emotional impact. He makes more money in a month than most families see in a year, but when our family restaurant faces closure and my pregnant wife faces homelessness, he turns his back on us. The camera cut to shots of Hometown Grill with a business in crisis banner that Jake had obviously prepared for maximum visual impact. Several restaurant employees stood outside looking dejected, clearly coached for the interview. Jennifer Stone's voiceover continued. Local restaurant owner Jake Patterson faces closure of his family business, while his wealthy brother investment advisor Grady Patterson reportedly refuses to provide financial assistance that could save the establishment and protect jobs for 12 local employees. My phone started ringing immediately. The first call came from my boss, Catherine Hughes. Grady, what exactly is happening with your family situation? Catherine asked, her voice tight with professional concern. This news story is creating questions about your judgment and character. It's complicated, I said, trying to keep the explanation brief. My brother has been using my name to secure credit without my knowledge, and now he's using media pressure to try to force me to cover his debts. The story makes it sound like you're abandoning family in crisis, Catherine said. Several clients have already called asking about your personal integrity. After hanging up with Catherine, I drove to work through a town that suddenly felt hostile. The radio talk show was already discussing the story, with callers expressing opinions about family loyalty and wealthy people's responsibilities. I think it's terrible when someone gets successful and forgets where they came from, one caller said. Family should come first, especially when you've got more money than you know what to do with. At the office, my colleagues treated me with a mixture of curiosity and awkward sympathy. Some seemed to believe Jake's version of events, while others waited to hear my side of the story. My assistant handed me a stack of phone messages. Reporters from 3 different news stations called, and several clients requested meetings to discuss their accounts. The most concerning message came from the State Licensing Board for Financial Advisors. They wanted to schedule a meeting to discuss complaints they had received about my personal financial management and family relationships. Professional misconduct complaints can affect your ability to practice, the licensing board representative explained when I returned the call. When a financial advisor's personal relationships involve allegations of abandoning family responsibilities, it raises questions about character and judgment. Lunchtime brought more devastating news. Jake had organized a fundraising event at the restaurant for Thursday evening, and the promotional materials prominently featured my name without my permission. Help Save Hometown Grill. The flyer read, "Local businessman Jake Patterson fights to save his family restaurant while his successful brother Grady Patterson refuses to help. Show your support for hardworking families over selfish wealth." The event was being promoted on social media with hashtags like Family First and Greedy Grady. Jake had created a narrative where I was the villain in a story about hardworking people being abandoned by privileged family members. By afternoon, my phone was buzzing constantly with text messages from acquaintances and distant relatives who had seen the news coverage. Most expressed disappointment in my apparent selfishness, while a few asked for my side of the story. One text message particularly stung. It came from my elderly neighbor, Mrs. Wilson, who had known me since childhood. Grady, I'm surprised you would let your brother's family lose their home when you could easily help them. I thought your parents raised you better than that. The psychological pressure was becoming overwhelming. Self-doubt began creeping in, despite my certainty that Jake's demands were unreasonable. The unified community disapproval was making me question whether I was actually being selfish by protecting my own financial security. Laura arrived at my apartment that evening looking determined rather than sympathetic. "I've been doing research about your brother's situation," she said, spreading papers across my kitchen table. "There are things about this story that don't add up." "What kind of things?" "The timeline doesn't make sense," Laura explained. "Jake claims the restaurant has been struggling for 8 months, but the county business license database shows he's been behind on fees and taxes for over a year. He's been in trouble much longer than he's admitting publicly." She showed me printouts of public records that revealed a pattern of financial irresponsibility dating back to the restaurant's opening. Jake had been accumulating debt and avoiding payments from the very beginning, not just during recent months of supposed crisis. "There's more," Laura continued. "I talked to a friend who works at the bank where Jake has his business accounts. She couldn't give me specific numbers, but she confirmed that Jake's financial problems are much worse than $55,000. Before I could fully process this information, my phone rang. The caller ID showed my parents' number. "Grady, you need to see the evening news," Mom said, her voice shaking. "Jake gave another interview, and this time he brought Amanda and the children." I turned on the television just in time to see Jake standing outside the restaurant with his pregnant wife and their 4-year-old daughter. Amanda looked uncomfortable, but she was clearly participating in the media campaign. "My husband is trying to save our family's livelihood," Amanda told the reporter. "Meanwhile, his brother lives in luxury while we face losing our home and our children's security. I can't understand how family relationships become so cold when money is involved." The little girl, Jake's daughter Emma, looked confused, but had obviously been coached to appear sad for the camera. The image of a pregnant woman and small child facing homelessness while the wealthy uncle refused to help was devastating for public perception. Jake spoke directly to the camera with practiced emotion. "Grady, if you're watching this, please remember that we're family. Remember all the times Mom and Dad sacrificed for both of us growing up. This isn't about charity. It's about family loyalty when it matters most." The news segment concluded with information about the evening's fundraising event, encouraging community members to show support for the Patterson family business. The reporter noted that Grady Patterson had declined to comment on the family dispute. My phone immediately started ringing again. This time the callers included church members, former classmates, and business associates who had seen the evening coverage. The consensus was clear: I was being publicly branded as the selfish rich brother who abandoned his struggling family. One call came from my childhood pastor, Reverend Williams, who had baptized both Jake and me years earlier. "Grady, I'm not calling to judge you," he said gently, "but I am concerned about the spiritual implications of family relationships being damaged by financial disagreements. Perhaps we could meet and discuss finding a Christian solution to this crisis." Even my spiritual community was being recruited into Jake's campaign to pressure me into paying his debts. The final blow came when I checked social media before bed. Jake had created a crowdfunding page titled "Save the Patterson Family Restaurant," complete with photos of me from my company's website contrasted with images of his struggling family. The page had already raised $3,400 from community members, but more importantly, it had generated hundreds of comments expressing outrage at my supposed selfishness. People I had known for years were publicly questioning my character and family values. "This is what happens when people get rich and forget their roots," one comment read. "I'll never do business with someone who abandons family like this," wrote another. The psychological warfare was working exactly as Jake had planned. The entire community now viewed me as the villain in a story about family loyalty versus personal greed. And I was starting to wonder if maybe they were right. As I finally tried to sleep that night, I realized that Jake had successfully weaponized public opinion against me. Tomorrow would bring even more pressure as the fundraising event turned my family crisis into community entertainment, with me cast as the heartless antagonist who could solve everyone's problems but chose not to. Friday morning brought an unexpected phone call that would change everything. Reporter Jennifer Stone contacted me directly, and her tone was completely different from the adversarial coverage of the previous day. "Mr. Patterson, I need to meet with you immediately," she said urgently. "I've uncovered information about your brother's financial situation that changes this entire story." We met at a coffee shop across town where Jennifer spread documents across our table like evidence at a police investigation. Her investigative journalism background had apparently kicked in after the initial emotional coverage. I started fact-checking Jake's claims about where the money went. Jennifer explained her professional demeanor, replacing the sympathetic storytelling from her news reports. What I found suggests serious financial crimes. The first document she showed me was a bank statement from the restaurant's business account, showing large cash withdrawals that didn't correspond to any business expenses. The amounts ranged from $500 to $2,000, occurring multiple times per week. Those withdrawals match exactly with the dates and times of Jake's visits to the Riverside Casino. Jennifer said, showing me surveillance photos that casino security had provided. He's been gambling with money that was supposed to pay suppliers and employees. More disturbing was evidence of diverted charity funds. Hometown Grill had hosted several fundraising events for local causes, including a benefit for the volunteer fire department and a cancer research dinner. The money raised at these events never reached the intended recipients. The fire department treasurer contacted me asking why they never received their donation. Jennifer explained. When I investigated, I found that Jake deposited all charity funds into the restaurant's general account and then withdrew the cash for personal use. She showed me documentation proving that over $12,000 raised for various community causes had been stolen and gambled away. The scope of Jake's deception extended far beyond family financial manipulation into outright theft from charitable organizations. "There's more," Jennifer continued, pulling out employee time records and payroll documentation. "Jake has been skimming from employee tips and failing to pay required employment taxes to the federal government. The evidence showed systematic theft from his own workers, many of whom were single mothers and college students depending on their tip income to pay rent and buy groceries. Jake had been stealing from the most vulnerable people while publicly portraying himself as a victim of family abandonment." Jennifer's final piece of evidence was the most damaging. She had obtained recordings of Jake's phone conversations with creditors where he explicitly claimed that I had already agreed to guarantee his debts and that payment was just a matter of paperwork processing. "In these calls, he's not just suggesting family support," Jennifer said. "He's committing wire fraud by making false claims about your financial guarantees to obtain credit and delay payments." I sat stunned as the full scope of Jake's criminal behavior became clear. This was not a struggling small business owner making desperate but legal attempts to save his restaurant. This was a systematic pattern of theft, fraud, and manipulation that had been ongoing for over a year. "Why are you bringing this to me instead of just reporting it?" I asked. Jennifer looked uncomfortable. "Because yesterday's news coverage was based on Jake's lies, and it painted you as the villain when you're actually another victim. I have an obligation to correct the record." That afternoon, I met with attorney Rachel Thompson, a white-collar crime specialist that David Park had recommended. Rachel's experience with financial fraud cases made her the perfect advocate for navigating both the legal and public relations aspects of Jake's crimes. "Based on what you've shown me, your brother has committed multiple felonies," Rachel said after reviewing Jennifer's evidence. "Identity theft, wire fraud, embezzlement, tax evasion, and charity fraud. This goes far beyond family financial disputes. What should I do?" "We need to contact the district attorney's office immediately," Rachel said, "and we need to prepare a comprehensive media response that clears your name while ensuring that Jake faces appropriate legal consequences." That evening, Detective Michael Torres from the Financial Crimes Unit arrived at my apartment to take my formal statement. His experience with white-collar cases had apparently prepared him for family financial manipulation. But even he seemed surprised by the scope of Jake's deception. Family financial abuse cases are among the most difficult to prosecute. Detective Torres explained, because victims often refuse to cooperate due to emotional manipulation. Your willingness to provide evidence and testimony will be crucial for protecting other victims. We spent 3 hours documenting every instance of identity theft, forged signatures, and unauthorized use of my name for credit applications. The detective was particularly interested in the timeline of Jake's escalating criminal behavior. This pattern suggests increasing desperation and risk-taking, Detective Torres said. When gambling addicts start stealing from charities and employees, they're usually approaching a complete breakdown. Saturday morning brought news that Jake's public relations campaign was about to backfire spectacularly. Detective Torres called to inform me that Jake had been arrested while attempting to withdraw the last remaining funds from the restaurant's account before fleeing town. We caught him at the bank trying to liquidate the account and transfer money to a personal account, Detective Torres explained. He had already purchased airline tickets to Las Vegas using restaurant funds, apparently planning to abandon his family and creditors. The arrest occurred just hours before Jake's scheduled community fundraising event, which had been promoted as a last-ditch effort to save the family business. Instead of a sympathy rally, the community learned that their local family values hero was actually a criminal who had been stealing from charities and employees. Jennifer Stone's corrected news coverage aired that evening with the headline, "Local Restaurant Owner Arrested for Fraud and Theft." The story revealed the full scope of Jake's crimes, including the stolen charity funds and employee tip theft that had funded his gambling addiction. The community reaction was immediate and devastating for Jake's public image. Social media posts that had previously condemned my selfishness were quickly deleted and replaced with apologies and expressions of support. The crowdfunding page was shut down, and contributors demanded their money back. Sunday morning brought a call from my parents, who were finally ready to acknowledge the reality of Jake's behavior. "Grady, we owe you an enormous apology," Mom said, her voice heavy with shame and exhaustion. "We had no idea how serious Jake's problems were, and we never should have tried to make you responsible for his choices." Dad's voice in the background sounded broken. "Son, we've been enabling his bad behavior for years without realizing it. We thought we were helping him, but we were actually making it possible for him to hurt more people." The weekend concluded with Amanda calling to thank me for not giving in to Jake's manipulation. "If you had paid his debts without understanding where the money really went," she said, "Jake would have just gambled it away and then come back demanding more. Your refusal to enable him probably saved our family from even worse financial destruction." As I reflected on the week's events, I realized that standing firm against family manipulation had not only protected my own financial security, but it also exposed criminal behavior that was harming the entire community. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for family is to refuse to participate in their destructive choices. Monday morning marked the beginning of legal proceedings that would finally bring accountability to Jake's criminal behavior. The courthouse was filled with local media community members and Jake's victims, including restaurant employees who had been cheated out of their wages and tip income. Judge William Foster had presided over family court for over 15 years, and his experience with complex family financial abuse cases was evident in how he handled the proceedings. His stern demeanor made it clear that he took these crimes seriously, regardless of the family relationships involved. "Mr. Jake Patterson," Judge Foster said as Jake was brought into the courtroom in handcuffs, "you are charged with multiple counts of fraud, embezzlement, identity theft, and tax evasion. How do you plead?" Jake's court-appointed attorney advised him to plead not guilty initially, but the evidence against him was overwhelming. Detective Torres had compiled bank record surveillance footage, recorded phone calls, and testimony from dozens of victims that painted a clear picture of systematic criminal behavior. Amanda sat in the gallery looking exhausted but determined. She had filed for divorce the day after Jake's arrest, finally accepting that his behavior posed an ongoing threat to their children's welfare and security. "I can't protect my kids if I keep believing Jake's promises to change," Amanda had told me during a difficult conversation over the weekend. They need stability, and that means getting as far away from their father's chaos as possible. The preliminary hearing revealed the full scope of Jake's financial crimes. Prosecutor Elena Martinez presented evidence showing that Jake had stolen nearly $80,000 through various schemes over the past 18 months. This defendant used his family relationships, his business position, and his community standing to commit fraud against multiple victims. Prosecutor Martinez said, "He stole from charities, employees, family members, and creditors while portraying himself as a struggling family man deserving of sympathy." The most damning testimony came from Susan Carter, a college student who had worked as a server at Hometown Grill. Susan tearfully explained how Jake had been systematically stealing her tip money to fund his gambling addiction. "I was working 30 hours a week while taking classes, and I couldn't understand why my tip income was always less than what customers had left," Susan said. "I thought maybe I was bad at math, but it turns out my boss was stealing from me to pay for his casino trips." Other restaurant employees testified about unpaid wages, bounced paychecks, and Jake's lies about why their payments were delayed. The picture emerged of an employer who was stealing from vulnerable workers while publicly claiming to be protecting their jobs. Detective Torres presented evidence of Jake's gambling activity, including casino surveillance footage showing him spending thousands of dollars while his employees went unpaid. The contrast between his public image as a struggling family man and his private behavior as a compulsive gambler was stark. The charity fraud evidence was particularly damaging to Jake's character. Representatives from the Volunteer Fire Department Cancer Research Foundation and Children's Hospital testified about donations that never reached their intended recipients. "We trusted Jake Patterson to organize fundraising events because he was a respected local business owner," said Fire Chief Robert Adams. "Instead, he used our good name to steal money from community members who thought they were helping important causes." Wednesday brought the most difficult part of the proceedings, victim impact statements. I had prepared my testimony carefully with Rachel Thompson's help, focusing on the broader implications of family financial abuse rather than just personal grievances. Your Honor, my brother's crimes extended far beyond stealing my identity or forging my signature," I said, addressing the court. "He weaponized family relationships to manipulate not just me, but our entire community. He used the expectation of family loyalty to justify criminal behavior and public manipulation." I explained how Jake's media campaign had turned legitimate boundary setting into a public relations nightmare that threatened my professional reputation and personal relationships. Family financial abuse is particularly insidious because it exploits love and loyalty to enable criminal behavior. I continued, "When someone uses family bonds to justify theft and fraud, they damage not just their immediate victims, but the entire concept of healthy family relationships." My parents also provided victim impact statements, finally acknowledging their role in enabling Jake's destructive behavior over the years. "We thought we were helping our son by constantly rescuing him from the consequences of poor choices," Dad said, his voice shaking with emotion. "Instead, we were teaching him that family relationships could be manipulated to avoid accountability." Mom's statement was even more powerful. "We put pressure on our responsible son to sacrifice his financial security for our irresponsible son's criminal behavior. We participated in family financial abuse without recognizing what we were doing." Thursday brought Jake's final attempt to avoid accountability. His attorney argued for leniency based on addiction issues and family pressures, but Judge Foster was unmoved by excuses. "Mr. Patterson, your gambling addiction does not justify stealing from charities, employees, and family members," Judge Foster said. "Your behavior represents a systematic pattern of criminal activity disguised as family financial crisis." The sentencing hearing revealed additional evidence that Jake had been planning to flee the jurisdiction before his arrest. Police had found airline tickets, cash, and a fake identification document in his possession when he was apprehended at the bank. This defendant was prepared to abandon his pregnant wife and child while stealing the last remaining assets from his business, Prosecutor Martinez argued. He shows no genuine remorse, only anger at being caught. Jake finally pled guilty to avoid a lengthy trial, but his allocution was filled with self-pity and blame-shifting rather than genuine accountability. "I made some bad choices when I was under pressure," Jake said, still minimizing his criminal behavior. "I never meant to hurt anyone, and I thought my family would support me through difficult times." Judge Foster was clearly unimpressed by Jake's continued deflection of responsibility. "Mr. Patterson, you have shown no understanding of the harm your actions caused to multiple victims," Judge Foster said. "Your crimes were not momentary lapses in judgment. They were deliberate, systematic acts of theft and fraud that continued for over a year." The judge sentenced Jake to 3 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 18 months, along with restitution requirements totaling nearly $100,000, including interest and penalties. The sentence must reflect the seriousness of these crimes and the need to deter others from similar behavior, Judge Foster explained. Family relationships do not provide immunity from criminal accountability. Friday brought unexpected news that would provide additional justice for Jake's victims. Detective Torres discovered that Jake had maintained a secret bank account in another state containing over $30,000 that he had hidden from creditors and family members. "We found this account during our investigation of his planned flight," Detective Torres explained. "This money was apparently his escape fund accumulated by stealing from multiple sources over many months." The discovery of hidden assets meant that victims could recover more of their stolen money than initially expected. Restaurant employees would receive their unpaid wages, charities would recover their stolen donations, and creditors would receive partial payment on fraudulent debts. Amanda was particularly relieved by this development. "At least now I can pay some bills and start rebuilding our lives without Jake's criminal behavior hanging over us," she said. The week concluded with a community meeting where victims and supporters gathered to discuss lessons learned from Jake's crimes. The focus was on recognizing financial manipulation and supporting healthy family boundaries rather than enabling destructive behavior. Jennifer Stone's follow-up reporting highlighted the broader implications of family financial abuse and the importance of legal accountability even when family relationships are involved. This case demonstrates that love and loyalty cannot be used to justify criminal behavior, Jennifer concluded her final report. Sometimes protecting family means refusing to participate in their destructive choices. As the legal proceedings wrapped up, I reflected on how standing firm against manipulation had ultimately served justice not just for me, but for Jake's many other victims who might never have received accountability if family pressure had succeeded in covering up his crimes. 1 year later, I sat in my office reviewing the profound changes that had transformed not just my life, but my entire understanding of family relationships and personal boundaries. The crisis that had nearly destroyed my professional reputation and financial security had ultimately taught me the most valuable lesson of my adult life. True love sometimes requires saying no. Jake was serving his sentence at the state correctional facility where he had finally begun participating in gambling addiction counseling and financial responsibility programs. His letters to family members showed the first genuine signs of accountability and remorse that any of us had seen in years. "Grady, I know this apology is way overdue," his most recent letter read, "but I need you to know that you were right to refuse my demands. If you had given me money, I would have gambled it away and then come back asking for more. Your refusal to enable my behavior was the only thing that could have stopped the cycle." The letter continued with details about his therapy progress and plans for making genuine amends to his victims upon release. For the first time in our adult relationship, Jake was taking full responsibility for his choices without blaming external circumstances or family dynamics. Amanda had successfully rebuilt her life as a single mother with the support of restitution funds and a new job at the county social services office. Her experience surviving financial manipulation had inspired her to help other families recognize and escape similar situations. "Working with families in crisis has shown me how common financial abuse really is," Amanda told me during a recent visit. "So many people think they're helping loved ones when they're actually enabling destructive behavior." Her children were thriving in their new stable environment. Emma, now 5 years old, was excelling in kindergarten and showed no lasting effects from the chaos of her father's criminal behavior. The new baby born after Jake's incarceration was healthy and surrounded by genuine family support rather than manipulation. My parents had undergone their own transformation through family therapy and support groups for relatives of gambling addicts. They finally understood how their well-intentioned efforts to help Jake had actually enabled increasingly destructive behavior. We thought love meant always saying yes to family requests, Mom explained during one of our regular family dinners. But we learned that real love requires boundaries and accountability. Dad had become involved with a support group for families affected by gambling addiction, sharing his experience about how enabling behavior can escalate from simple financial help to participation in criminal activity. I tell other parents that rescuing your adult children from consequences doesn't protect them, Dad said. It just teaches them that they can manipulate family relationships to avoid responsibility. My professional life had not only recovered but had reached new heights of success and satisfaction. The crisis had taught me valuable lessons about recognizing financial manipulation that proved invaluable in my work with clients. Catherine Hughes had promoted me to senior partner after observing how I handled the family crisis with integrity despite enormous pressure. The firm now offered specialized services for individuals and families dealing with financial abuse and manipulation. Your experience gives you unique credibility when counseling clients about family financial boundaries, Catherine explained during my promotion meeting. You understand both the emotional and legal complexities involved in these situations. I had begun speaking at professional conferences about family financial abuse, sharing insights about how financial success can make individuals targets for manipulation by their own relatives. The presentations were always well received, particularly by other financial professionals who had experienced similar pressures. Laura and I had gotten engaged 6 months earlier, and our relationship had grown stronger through navigating the family crisis together. Her background in healthcare had given her excellent instincts for recognizing manipulation and setting healthy boundaries. Watching you stand up to your family's pressure taught me so much about the difference between helping and enabling, Laura said as we planned our wedding. It's made me more confident about setting boundaries in my own family relationships. Our engagement had been supported enthusiastically by my parents, who finally understood that Laura's influence on boundary setting had been beneficial for the entire family rather than divisive. The restaurant space that had once housed Hometown Grill had been converted into a community center, offering financial literacy classes and support groups for families affected by gambling addiction. The transformation felt symbolic of how crisis could be converted into community healing and education. I volunteered there monthly, teaching basic financial planning and helping people recognize signs of financial manipulation in family relationships. The work was deeply satisfying, turning my painful experience into resources for helping others avoid similar situations. Jennifer Stone had won a state journalism award for her investigative reporting on Jake's crimes, particularly her coverage of how family financial abuse can escalate into community-wide fraud. Her work had inspired other reporters to investigate similar cases in their communities. Your willingness to cooperate with the investigation made it possible to expose crimes that might otherwise have been hidden behind family loyalty, Jennifer told me during the award ceremony. The legal resolution had provided closure for all of Jake's victims. Restaurant employees had received their unpaid wages, plus interest charities had recovered their stolen donations, and creditors had been partially compensated through the restitution fund. Detective Torres had used Jake's case as a training example for other law enforcement officers, demonstrating how family financial manipulation can mask serious criminal activity. This case shows why it's important to investigate family financial disputes thoroughly, Detective Torres explained during a police training seminar. What looks like a personal disagreement can actually be evidence of systematic fraud. The community response had evolved from initial sympathy for Jake to appreciation for the importance of accountability and boundaries in family relationships. Many people approached me to share their own experiences with family financial manipulation and to thank me for standing firm against pressure. You showed us that saying no to family doesn't make you selfish. Mrs. Wilson, my elderly neighbor, told me. Sometimes it's the most loving thing you can do. The crowdfunding page that had briefly raised money for Jake's defense had been converted into a legitimate fund supporting financial literacy education and gambling addiction treatment. The community channeled their desire to help into constructive support, rather than enabling destructive behavior. Rachel Thompson had become not just my attorney but a friend and mentor in understanding the legal complexities of family financial abuse. Her expertise had protected not only my financial interests but my professional reputation during the crisis. Your case demonstrates why it's crucial to seek legal help immediately when family members use your identity or credit without permission, Rachel said. Waiting or trying to handle it privately often allows the abuse to escalate into criminal behavior. David Park's accounting expertise had been invaluable throughout the crisis, and his friendship had provided emotional support during the most difficult periods. His objective analysis of the financial evidence had helped me maintain perspective when family pressure was overwhelming. You taught me that helping friends sometimes means encouraging them to protect themselves rather than sacrifice for manipulative relatives, David said. As I reflected on the entire experience, the most profound realization was that my refusal to enable Jake's destructive behavior had ultimately benefited everyone involved, including Jake himself. By forcing him to face consequences for his choices, I had helped break a cycle of manipulation that was damaging our entire family system. The crisis had revealed that what I had always interpreted as family loyalty was actually a dysfunctional pattern where responsibility was rewarded with increased demands, while irresponsibility was rewarded with rescue and support. Breaking that pattern had been painful but necessary for everyone's long-term well-being. The financial recovery had been complete. My credit score had returned to its previous excellent level, my professional reputation was stronger than ever, and my savings had grown substantially due to increased income and speaking fees from sharing my experience. More importantly, my emotional recovery had included learning to distinguish between healthy family support and destructive enabling. I had developed confidence in setting boundaries without guilt and offering help in ways that encouraged responsibility rather than dependence. The engagement ring on Laura's finger reminded me daily that healthy relationships are built on mutual respect and boundaries, rather than manipulation and obligation. Our relationship had grown stronger because we both understood the importance of individual integrity within committed partnerships. Looking toward the future, I felt genuine optimism about family relationships that would be based on honesty and respect, rather than financial manipulation and emotional pressure. My parents were learning to interact with both their sons as adults rather than trying to manage our relationship with each other. Jake's eventual release from prison would provide an opportunity to rebuild our relationship on a foundation of accountability and mutual respect, rather than enabling and resentment. His therapy progress suggested that genuine change was possible if he continued taking responsibility for his choices. The community center work had shown me how common family financial abuse really is, and how desperately people need examples of successful boundary setting. My experience had become a resource for others facing similar pressures from relatives who confuse love with financial sacrifice. The speaking engagements had connected me with financial professionals across the country who were dealing with similar cases. We had formed an informal network for sharing resources and strategies for helping clients protect themselves from family financial manipulation. As I prepared for my wedding and looked forward to starting a family with Laura, I felt confident that we understood the principles necessary for raising children with healthy boundaries and appropriate financial responsibility. Our experience with family manipulation had taught us valuable lessons about the difference between support and enabling. The true measure of my victory was not just the legal accountability that Jake had faced or the financial security I had protected. The real triumph was the transformation of our family dynamics from manipulation and enabling to honesty and appropriate boundaries. Standing up to family pressure when it involves financial manipulation requires tremendous courage, especially when you love the people who are making unreasonable demands. But sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is to refuse to participate in their destructive behavior. True family loyalty doesn't mean sacrificing your own financial security or integrity to cover for someone else's poor choices. Real love requires boundaries, accountability, and the willingness to let people face the consequences of their decisions. My experience taught me that helping someone often means saying no to their immediate requests while supporting their long-term growth and recovery. Financial success creates opportunities to help others, but it also requires the wisdom to distinguish between genuine assistance and enabling destructive patterns. The greatest gift I could give my family was teaching them that consequences follow choices, that love includes accountability, and that real support sometimes looks like refusing to rescue someone from the results of their own behavior. If you have ever faced pressure from family members to sacrifice your financial security for their poor choices, remember that protecting yourself isn't selfish. Sometimes saying no is the most loving thing you can do, both for yourself and for the people you care about. Has anyone in your family ever tried to pressure you into financial decisions that made you uncomfortable? How did you handle it, and what did you learn about setting boundaries with people you love? Share your story in the comments below, and remember that you're not alone in dealing with these difficult situations. If this story resonated with you or helped you think differently about family financial boundaries, please give it a like and share it with others who might benefit from hearing about the importance of saying no with love. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories about standing up for yourself while maintaining your integrity and values. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope it encourages you to trust your instincts about what healthy family relationships should look like. Remember that real love includes respect for boundaries, and true loyalty never requires you to sacrifice your own well-being for someone else's poor choices.